Hi guys, I'm Danny, and I started a Sunday gym because I've noticed lately that people tend to go to colleges and universities without actually knowing why they're there. And afterwards, starting jobs that are unfulfilling. So I'm interviewing different professionals to see what they have to say and share their knowledge and experience with you. I hope you enjoy it. Here it is. Right on. Brian, thank you for joining. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. How are you, Denny?
Can't complain, rather well, thank you. The program will be focused on three main questions. What do you do for a living? How did you get there? And how did you know that this was the way to go? So tell us what you do for a living, Brian.
Yeah, so I think I need to answer the question slightly differently, right? Because for a living, I'm actually a software developer. But nights and weekends, I work on a mental health brand. So it's podcasts, blog posts, and writing books in the mental health space, specifically on anxiety and depression. And I think
This
that's
is
probably what's
this is
more
actually a
interesting to
very
talk about.
serious matter, so I didn't knew that. So would you mind sending me the links about this so that I can put in the description below? More people might see it. That could definitely be useful.
Yeah, definitely.
Perfect. You please continue. Sorry for that.
No problem. Yeah. So I was, I think it will be more interesting to talk about the mental health stuff than software development. So
Absolutely.
how did I get into that? Was basically just sort of like personal experience. In high school and college, dealt with anxiety and depression. Still deal with those things, but have gotten, made a lot of progress with them, and that was why I felt called to start writing about my experiences, start talking about some of the things that had helped me, and start sharing some of the strategies that I had leveraged in my own life in hopes of helping other people going through the same things.
That's actually pretty solid, and you're not alone. A lot of people were doing it, and I've noticed that from the experience, not only from the channel here, but in general. I've been working with foreign companies for the last 12 years now, Asia, the two Americas, and everywhere basically. And it's really amazing to see how similar issues we all have, and it's also nice to see that as long as we don't ignore them and we act on them, they're actually most of the time pretty easy to be resolved. But that's only if you don't ignore the issue.
Yeah, and I think with mental health it can be challenging, sometimes very challenging, but like you said, we have to maintain the ability, or we need to maintain our focus on them, and sort of understand where we are, and not necessarily hide these things, and not necessarily just forget about them, because as we start to push some of these conditions down, or suppress them, they fester inside of us, right? And then the problem reemerges years later, and becomes a lot worse. Yeah, to the what you mentioned about a lot of people experiencing these sort of things. I mean, there is the statistical side of the story, which is like, 1 in 5 people experiences a mental health disorder, and then there's also just the more anecdotal experience of like, we just went through a global pandemic. There is, massive global uncertainty over the economy and geopolitical affairs and stuff like that. I think it's very normal for anybody who lives in a hyper connected world with their cell phone and the internet and TV and whatnot to see stories around the globe, and become, unsettled by them.
Couldn't agree more. And about the statistics, and take it from someone who used to work for the government, that can be so easily twisted. I'm not even going to take it into consideration. Though we're talking about, of course, not all statistics, but in general, you can amend a statistic very easily, regardless of the data that you have.
Yeah, you
And
definitely could.
uh,
I think the key takeaway, right, is like, it is there, the numbers are high, no matter
yeah,
what those numbers are. Like, if we start and say, okay, maybe we believe the 1 in 5 number, that's still a lot of people. And then
yeah,
there's also like, there's more, again, back to the anecdotal side of things. I believe I was reading a story in a newsletter last week, saying that like 90%, 98% of folks that were polled experience some form of anxiety, not necessarily an anxiety disorder, but had experienced anxiety in the last few years, because of the pandemic, because of the war in Ukraine, because of the because of the economic issues and the banking crisis in the U.S. And so it's like, regardless of what that actual number is, it's high. It could be 20,
yeah.
it could be 70. I don't know, but it's certainly high. And I look at those numbers and I say to myself, like, that's an opportunity for me to help some people, right? Because there's a lot of people out there that are struggling with these things.
No, absolutely. And at least for me personally, of course, the pandemic was actually more of a good thing because I had so much on my plate and it was crazy. And when everything stopped, I was kind of like forced to stop too. I didn't lose my job or anything. Like, things were fine, but that dynamic, that movement stopped, and I was able to focus on myself. And I'm a huge believer of this, that all of the problems that you have, all of the issues that you have are from yourself. Like, if you are focused on you, how to make yourself better, how to upgrade yourself, although upgrade is probably the best idea, how to improve yourself. If you focus on that, you'd be much better. And normally I am, but you do know how dynamic the world is, how crazy things are sometimes. So that force stop really, really helped.
Yeah, it was a very unique time. I think I look back on it with sort of two stories, right? One story being it was a really unsettling and scary time because nobody knew what was going on early on. Nobody knew who would get the disease, who would, get sick from the virus and all that. So it was like you're looking around hoping that nobody that you love that is in a vulnerable category is going to get this thing. There was that angle of it, and also like what's going to happen with the economy. Am I going to lose my job? So there was that scary stuff, but then there was the stuff that you're talking about where it's like, the world slowed down a lot, right? We were able
Yeah.
to focus on some pursuits of our own that maybe we didn't have time for before. We also were able to spend more time with loved ones, family members, whoever was in our tight social circle, because kind of, I don't know if the rules were different in Europe versus the US, but there was a period where it was
They
like,
were very different. Like, for
okay,
example, most of the time during the pandemic, like, some of the big restaurants were closed, some of them, and some of the big clubs. But all in all, it kept going. And this mask thing wasn't exactly mandatory the whole time. Like, it was mandatory the first 2 or 3 months. I interviewed a guy. He was actually a doing sword fights. Like, so are you guys like going over there? He was like, well, I'm wearing gloves, a mask, and I'm keeping people at distance. So there's no reason not to do the sword fight. So it was pretty funny. But yeah, I know that I don't know about the US much, but I know in Australia things were like really, really tight. They locked down there. But then again, in all fairness, it's not really fair. As far as I know, maybe you can correct me, of course. But as far as I know, I don't think it's fair to compare the US with Australia, because US is basically like 50 countries in one country. That's my understanding. 50 states, and the different states have different governors, and the different governments have like different rules. I hope I'm getting it right. I
yeah,
hope.
to a degree. I'm not a political scientist, so I don't know the ins and
Yeah,
outs all that well, but it is one country, but then the states do have their own laws. So for example, right, like there are a lot of states in the US that have made it legal to buy marijuana.
yeah,
But there are also a lot of states where it's still very illegal. So it's like you could be in one state, and you could buy and use marijuana, and then you go to another state with marijuana, and you could get in serious trouble for it. So to a degree, yes,
yeah.
it's almost like 50 different countries. I think the main difference is that instead of like if you went to Europe and you go to a legitimate different country, it's different architecture, it's different
Yeah.
culture, it's different language, it's different food. In the US, yes, there's different food and there's different cultures and stuff, but everybody's speaking, for the most part, it's English and Spanish
Yeah.
rather than 50 different languages.
Now, I think we have like 30 official languages here in the EU. And it's really awesome because, and I before COVID, I used to travel a lot. I graduated in Denmark, and it's really amazing because it's not really that big of a place, but there are a lot of countries and a lot of different things. So traveling is, yeah, I think still is pretty cheap. Like, you can go from one side of the continent to another if you booked it in advance for like dirt cheap money. So it's awesome because you'd be there for like 3 or 4 days and you can really enjoy your time over there.
Yeah, it's a very unique place to be, and like you said, you can once you're over there, you can travel around for really cheap and experience all sorts of different cultures and traditions. It's very exciting to go over there.
Yes, and for the third question, it's going to be interesting to hear what you're going to have to say, because the third question is, how did you knew that this was the way to go? Now, the reason I'm asking is because yes, you said it in the beginning that you went through this yourself. But then again, well, you're an adult, so I assume that you went through a lot of things, but that's the one that you decided to go with. Now, you could have gone with anything else. You mentioned in the beginning that you're a computer scientist. That's actually a sector that has a lot of issues and a lot of ground to cover. But your heart was elsewhere. Your heart and your soul, I hope I'm making sense. Your heart and soul was in this particular direction. So there was no way, correct me if I'm wrong, of course, but there was no way you would have done it if you didn't feel it like deep up in your chest here that this was
Yeah,
true. So
for
how
sure.
did you figure it out?
Without being too corny, it's sort of like just listening to yourself and listening to your heart or your soul, right? I felt as though I had, this is not, I'm not trying to toot my own horn or anything. Like, it was challenging and I wouldn't want to go through it again. But also there are folks who have endured far worse than what I've been through. It was just, I felt as though I had experienced a lot on the mental health front. I had gone through a lot of, episodes with anxiety and depression, and it became such a part of my life, right? It was something that I deeply cared about. I had invested so much time and energy and emotion into that it felt like kind of the only way. If I'm being totally honest, right? It's like if I had written my books and they all sold really well, and I was able to make a living off of them, I would do that full time rather than be a software developer. Don't get me wrong. I enjoy writing software and I love collaborating with different folks and building products. Like, it's really fun to build product. But at the same,
as I know, nobody, absolutely nobody from what I know is a software developer without loving it. Because that's not something you can do just for fun.
Yeah, it's software development is very technical and can be frustrating because you're getting into the nitty gritty and looking at your code and being like, oh, I missed a semicolon here, and that's why my whole program doesn't work, right? So if you don't enjoy that sort of thing, or at least you don't enjoy, if you don't enjoy the end result of having built a product, then you're not going to want to go through all that mess, right? But yeah, on the book front and the mental health stuff, it was like, it just became, it's sort of who I am. It sort of became a big part of my identity. And also, again, not trying to glamorize or anything like that, but like the amount of pain that I felt as though I had been through, it was just something where it was like, I now understand what that feels like, and I can see it in other people, right? If somebody is talking about their own experiences and saying, I've been through these episodes with anxiety, depression, I'm suffering in this kind of way. Like, I can feel that, and I know how awful it can be and probably is. And so, having a lot of conversations early on with folks like that, it was like, man, I can't promise, I can't guarantee that I have all the answers here, but like, I hear those stories and I want to do something to help, So the books really became my way of potentially helping folks, and they definitely have helped. I've heard from a lot of readers across the world, and that's been really humbling and really meaningful for me. But yeah, that's kind of the whole story, was just, personal experience, a lot of pain turned into, hey, what can I do about this? How can I make something positive out of it?
I'm glad that you were able to make something positive out of the pain, out of your pain. And also, I loved when you said that you were, excuse me, that you were able to understand it, because you cannot resolve a problem you don't understand. You cannot, and this is a little bit of a rough comparison, but you cannot fight an enemy you can't see. It's not going to work. It's not going to happen. The reason I'm asking about how you knew that this was the way to go is because I'm sure you have the same issue in the US, although maybe not as big as here, but it's getting there. A lot of people tend to go to colleges and universities because they have this stigma from their parents, which meant, and they meant well, of course, but they have this stigma that as long as you have the diploma, your future is either secure or way better. And of course, I'm not against colleges and universities in any way. I just don't want to see people losing their time with things that obviously aren't for them, but they're doing it nonetheless. I went to college. I have a master's degree. I'll start a PhD in September. So obviously, I don't have that much of an issue with universities. Otherwise, I wouldn't have been, doing it. But I'm pretty sure you've seen this. Can you give some kind of an advice to those people? Because in all fairness, if you do something, like let's say you study something that's obviously not for you for about 5 years, and then you start working on it, and it clearly isn't for you, well, then you're going to have depression and anxiety 100%, because it's impossible to be miserable 10 hours of your life and to go home and be happy. It's just not going to work. So do you have an advice for that?
Well, I think we could do several podcast episodes just on this question alone. But I think
You're
kind of
welcome.
the high level points, right? Like you said, if you're doing something for 5 years, 10 years, whatever that length of time is that you don't enjoy, that you maybe even hate, yeah, it's inevitable that you would experience probably depression. I don't know about anxiety. I'd say probably more on the depression side. It's certainly possible anxiety. You may be saying, looking around, being like, I'm wasting my life. I'm afraid of, getting older and doing these things that I don't want to do. And then all of a sudden,
you will be a miserable person.
Yep. So one way or another, right, that misery comes into play. I think when it comes to college, right, it's like the decision to go or not go, or, study a certain thing, go to a certain university. It's so personal. I can't give broad advice on that sort of subject. I would just say, like, it is tough when you're 18 years old and you need to make a decision as to, like, I'm going to go spend a lot of money doing this thing when number one, I'm not even sure what field I want to go into. And number two, I don't actually know the ins and outs of the finances of, like, I have this much money, it's going to cost me that much money. The loans have a certain, if I take out loans, they have a certain interest rate on them, and I'm actually going to have to work for X amount of years to pay that all back. So I think, the high level advice would be, think about how much money it might cost you to have that experience at university. Think about what you might want to do. You might not even know yet, right? And so it's like, I think right now we're sort of at an inflection point with the universities in general, where people are starting to realize that, going to a private institution for $200,000, $300,000 US dollars might not be the best.
That's a lot of money.
Right. Might not be the best idea. If one, they don't know what they want to do. If two, they are then forced into a path to pay back these loans for the next 10 years of their life or whatever. And then they're even further trapped into that path of doing something that they don't want to do. So the high level advice, right? And again, it's very, very hard to give personalized advice here, because I don't know everybody's specific situation, but just thinking about, like, what is it that you want to do, right? What are you interested in? Could going to a specific university help you get along on that path? Are there other ways to pursue some of your passions, some of the things that you're interested in? I still think that if you want to get employed in the US, and I think in Europe, and, kind of across the world, I think there's still that societal, I don't know, almost requirement of saying, like, you kind of need a degree, right?
Yeah, the word is stigma.
Yeah, I mean, but it's also like a requirement. The stigma would be more like, stigma has like a negative connotation. I don't know. Anyway, I'll get out of the semantics, but thinking about, what do you want to do? Could you pursue that in the path that you're potentially going down at university? And then also thinking about the money, because it can be really expensive. And just to sort of like cap it off in terms of what I do, right? There are a lot of folks, in the IT and tech worlds who are starting to learn through boot camp programs, online tutorials and whatnot. And if they're able to, basically build applications, build software products, and show them to potential employers, that becomes a much more compelling, like, you have evidence of being able to say, I know what I'm doing, right? Versus like having a piece of paper and going into something a little bit more abstract of a career. If you can say, I have these skills and I can prove it to you, if the path that you want to go down allows for that sort of thing, then there might be an argument to say, like, hey, maybe I try to not go to university. Maybe I try to, take these online courses, do it in a cheaper fashion, whatever it may be. But again, it's hard to say. And there's also, right, there's the social aspect of going to college. You live out on your own. It's kind of this nice transition period where you're forced into needing to make friends and, do things that excite you and whatnot. So there's so many different factors. It's hard to say what somebody should do, but.
Absolutely. I remember the complex that I lived in when I was in the university, and we were 17 people from 15 nationalities. It was awesome.
Wow.
Yeah, every single month was some country's birthday, somebody's birthday. It was perfect. It really did. Just an incredibly warm memory. I couldn't help but notice that you mentioned the price a few times. Now, we have expensive universities here in Europe as well, of course, but most of them are pretty affordable. Like, for example, I'll be doing a PhD, but I wanted to find the cheapest university because I'm working. I don't have time. I just want to be done with it and call it a day. So the PhD that I'll be doing will be $500 per year, which
That's
is
great.
yeah. Now I could have went to Germany and that would have cost me about $9,000 per year. I mean, I'm recalculating in euro, right?
Yep.
But even in Germany, I would have been able to find something for like $2,000, which is pretty good too. Yeah, there are incredibly expensive universities here, but most of them are very, very affordable. And isn't that the case over there as well?
In the US, it's hard, right? It's like if you want to go to a prestigious university, one that like would get you, into certain organizations and social circles, and then line yourself up, to be able to get jobs at certain employers and whatnot. It comes back to that piece of paper, right? It's like if you want the piece of paper that says I went to Princeton, you're going to pay $300,000, something like that. So it can be really expensive. There are universities in the US that are like, they're considered like state-run institutions. So like I live in Massachusetts, there are a bunch of schools that fall under this umbrella of like University of Massachusetts. If you live in state, and even if you don't, like it'll still be cheaper, but if you live in state, if you live in Massachusetts, the cost will be much lower to you, but it's still going to cost you like, I don't know, I'd say probably 30-40% of that price tag that I was mentioning earlier. There's a lot of folks, and again, there's so many different angles to things to talk about here, but it's like there's a lot of people who live in California just so they can send their kids to the California state-run schools, because not only are a lot of them like really prestigious, but then they're also more affordable. So it's an option to potentially go to state school, but it becomes tough. It's like, one of the things that people are thinking about nowadays is like, do I send my kid to a private run university and pay $300,000 when it's not a top tier university, right? Maybe I should just send them to state school instead. So a lot of tough decisions to make. Looking back on it, I mean, I was very fortunate to, go to a private institution and get some support from my parents and stuff like that. But man, I don't know how to navigate all that stuff. I just know that looking back on it, it's like I'm fortunate, and there's a lot of tough decisions to make.
There are. It's indeed a complicated matter, and this is why I really love to hear all kind of responses, because I've never actually had the same one. So it's awesome. Brian, with that said, do you happen to have any words of wisdom?
Probably just to tie it back to the mental health side of things.
Yeah.
I think that when you go to college, it gets painted as this experience where you're like, I'm going to school, I'm partying all the time, I'm having the time of my life, it's super exciting. I'll be totally honest, like my experience at university, like, as I was going through all these different mental health conditions, I did have fun. Don't get me wrong, I did. But there was also a lot of pain in there. And I think for a lot of people, going to college is difficult, right? You're living out on your own for the first time. You have to make friends. Sometimes the people that you meet initially aren't going to end up being your friends at the end of university. There's all these social struggles. You have so much time that you don't necessarily even know what to do with. And so for somebody who is prone to overthinking, you may experience more anxiety. You may experience more depression. So just know that like those conditions can be par for the course. Sometimes, right, with mental health, the discrepancy of like, hey, I expected this and this is my reality is over here. When that discrepancy is large, that can create even more pain than we like are already experiencing. So sometimes being able to say to ourselves, like, I'm at college, I'm experiencing anxiety, I'm experiencing depression, whatever it may be, it's okay, it's normal. That doesn't mean I have to sit through it and suffer. But it's sort of par for the course, and I'm not going to like create even more pain for myself. Instead, I'm going to say, this is normal, but what I need to go do is go find help, right? I need to go start talking to people, find different solutions for myself, rather than like sit in my corner and be like, I can't tell anybody about what I'm experiencing because it's so abnormal. So just a sort of like I don't know what the right word is, a word to the wise to those going through the university experience. It can be challenging at times, but you can also look back on it and say it was a really unique, interesting, and special part of your life.
Those are problems that are here, for us to resolve. So indeed, you're absolutely right. It's just part of the path. with that said, Brian, huge thank you for being with me. Huge thank you for being such an amazing example, man. It's amazing talking to you.
Thank you. Thanks for having me, Denny.
Right on. Have a good day. Bye.
You too.
Guys, I hope this one was useful. Please follow the channel on YouTube, Rumble, Twitter, Gap, LinkedIn, and Facebook. Ring the bell and all the good stuff. Have a nice week ahead, and I'll see you next Sunday.